This is kind of unusual that we have a dialogue on a Wednesday evening, but it's also not very usual that it's the 100th dialogue in the series, which started in May of 2009. There are some other interesting developments. Normally, Stuart Wood, our executive director, would be introducing the speakers and emceeing the program, but he's a new father. He had a boy last night about 5 o'clock, so we have to have an alternative introduction. And normally that would be Dick Haskell, who's chair of Sustainable Claremont, but as of Monday evening, he abdicated for 3 months so that Hugh Cox could take over and he could use his time writing up a journal article on some data he collected for the new plant producing solar cells that Devin Hartman is creating. So the interim chair is Hugh Cox, who will actually be conducting the meeting this evening. We do have another. We really appreciate that. It's asking a lot, the first duty to take on one of these dialogues. We actually do have another dialogue that's coming up on safe, clean water. It's how the minimum of $285 million a year that was approved under Measure W last year will be spent. And there's a flyer up here for that if you want to look at it. We'll be producing more flyers and advertising it, of course. And so with all of those strange things happening, we wonder if there isn't something to astrology after all. And the next dialogue, which is coming up on December 10th, is actually on a Tuesday, so it's more unusual stuff. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Hugh Cox, who will take over the program from here.
Thank you, Freeman. Just one point of clarification, Dick did not actually abdicate the chair, and it was not even a bloodless coup, but he is stepping down just for 3 months to do a little bit of writing he's promised to do for Devin Hartman, and asked me to fill in for a couple of months. So here we are, and I wanted to welcome you to our discussion on imagining a sustainable future for Claremont South Village. You'll be hearing from the team from South Village Development that is dedicated to creating a resilient and sustainable neighborhood. And among the things that they're going to cover are opportunities and challenges in the South Village, the current existing environmental conditions there, the relationship between housing policy and climate change, which I find a particularly fascinating subject, sustainability rating systems and which rating systems they're thinking about using on this project, and opportunities for the Claremont community to advocate for comprehensive and inclusive sustainability. One point that's worth emphasizing is that the folks that you're going to hear from tonight are not part of the city. They are not part of the group that is writing the sustainable plan. The Village South plan. That is a city effort, and that's running along a different path. This is a group of entities that have an interest in the property and are thinking about the development opportunities there and wanted to share some of their ideas with all of us. So the folks that will be presenting are Drew Shula and, what did I do with your card? Rebecca Ramsdale. She's she's a fill-in for somebody else that was going to be here. But anyway, they are both from the Verdigal Group. And the Verdigal Group, Drew is the founder and principal of the Verdigal Group, which is a leading LA-based full-service green building consulting firm specializing in certification project management net zero, commissioning, energy modeling, and program management. Verdigal Group is a certified B Corporation and 1% for the Planet member company. In addition to managing some of the highest profile green building projects in California, including LEED Platinum and Living Building Challenge projects, Verdigal Group hosts the nation's largest annual net zero building conference. Drew sits on several boards, including the U.S. Green Building Council for LA, Living Building Challenge LA Collaborative, Environmental Charter Schools, and the Cal State LA Institute for Urban Sustainability. And Drew has received numerous recognition awards, including the USGBC Leadership Award and several on the Green Build LA Host Committee, and serves on the Green Build LA Host Committee. Drew has been a speaker at the Living Future UN Conference, and my notes just got messed up. And he holds a 5-year professional degree in architecture from the University of Notre Dame. I don't have the bio on Rebecca Ramsdale, but she is a project manager at the Verdigal Group and has been there for how many years?
I've known Drew for about 3, but I recently joined about 5 months ago.
Okay, and
Background knowledge in construction.
in construction.
As a general contractor.
Okay, good. And then from Village Partners, Kaitlin Morris will be speaking as well. Village Partners is a full-service real estate development company focused on the development of distinctive infill mixed-use projects, including multifamily, residential, retail, and complementary office. Kaitlin joined Village Partners in 2015 as a development manager. She's involved in market research, acquisition, project underwriting, design development, and due diligence. Kaitlin brings an interdisciplinary and empirically informed perspective, coupled with a comprehensive knowledge of the Southern California region, to her work with Village Partners. Prior to her work with Village Partners, Kaitlin's academic and professional work was grounded in economics, including time spent working at the San Francisco Center for Economic Development. She's a graduate of the University of Southern California Sol Price School of Public Policy with a master's degree in planning and an emphasis on economic development, and also a graduate with a BA in economics from Scripps College. And with that, I will turn it over to the presentation team. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugh.
Thanks, Hugh.
So first of all, thank you so much for being here. We are so encouraged by the level of interest and engagement in sustainability so far in the community. We want to specifically thank Sustainable Claremont, the board, the staff, the leadership, for their continued engagement in this project, as well as for providing us this opportunity to chat with you guys tonight. What we're going to be talking about tonight is what it means to be a sustainable community in the era of climate change. We have some very ambitious sustainability goals, but we think that Claremont is the kind of exceptional community where this kind of thing can be done at a neighborhood level. We're going to be talking about our project with a brief overview of our team, as well as our vision, our proposed program, and our values. After that, we're going to get into sustainability. So let's get started. So this is a brief overview of our project team. The development team is Village Partners and Artico Partners. Village Partners is the lead developer on the Hibbard portion of the parcel, which is the southernmost. Village Partners is a transit-oriented community developer. That means that our work focuses on transit-oriented development. This kind of community can reduce household energy usage, driving, and greenhouse gas emissions by 40% in households. I'm the development manager for Village Partners. As Hugh indicated, my background is in economics and urban planning, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to bring my expertise and my knowledge about public policy and sustainable communities to Claremont. The other part of our development team is Artico Partners. They are our co-developers on the KGI portion of the parcel, which is where the historic Vortox building is. Jerry Tessier is here tonight. You guys might recognize him, as well as Ed Tessier. They are the principal developers for Artico. Artico is a local development group which specializes in historic reuse, adaptive preservation, and they also have very specific expertise in market halls. Our design team is made up of 2 architects and a landscape architect. Both of our architects are new urbanists, which I'm going to be explaining what that means in a bit more detail throughout the presentation. But Moul Palazoidis, one of our principal architects, They are a husband and wife team led by Stefanos Palazoidis and Elizabeth Moule, both of whom were founding members and original authors of the Charter for New Urbanism. They have deep roots in Claremont. They have worked here for many years. Stefanos specifically was the Scripps architect for over 30 years. He was involved in the restoration of Balch Hall, the building of the Sally Tiernan Field House and the New Dorm, and he was involved with writing the master plan for both Scripps College and Pomona College. Our other architect is Torti Gallus. They are similarly new urbanists with deep expertise in transit-oriented development, sustainable communities, and the lost art of placemaking. John Torti is the firm's principal, and he's personally involved in this project and the design and the planning of it. And he brings decades of experience in designing and developing sustainable communities. Our landscape architect is Studio MLA. They are a Los Angeles-based female-led landscape architecture firm, They are led by Mia Lair. Their emphasis is on sustainable landscape, native landscape, ecological and restorative justice. They've done a lot of work on the Los Angeles River, and they've done some work in Claremont as well, at the Pitzer Phase 2 dorms, at Pitzer College, as well as at the Robert Redford Conservancy for Southern California Sustainability. So that's our development team, our design team. The technical portion of our team is made up of the Verdigal Group, which is our sustainability consultant, and Fusco as our civil engineer. I'll speak a little bit about Fusco, and then I'll hand it over to Drew to introduce Verdigal and to give you guys a little bit more of an understanding about who Verdigal is, what they do, and why we brought them on. Fusco is our civil engineer, and they bring a lot of expertise in LEED certification, creating green streets, green infrastructure, and they're a very competent local firm. And I'll let Drew speak to Verdigal.
Great. Thank you, Kaitlin. Thank you, Hugh, for the awesome introductions. And Dick for hosting us here. Thank you so much. Really great for us to be a part of this meeting tonight with Sustainable Claremont. And our Verdigal Group team is super excited to be a part of this exciting project. And I just want to get a quick understanding of you guys here tonight. Anybody have a background in the building industry? Builders or a couple people? Great. And I bet a lot of people here are involved with the colleges in Claremont, right? A show of hands people that have taught or been a part of the couple people. Okay. And then anybody in the sustainability world, just generally in sustainability or solar or anything like that? A couple people? Great. Okay, cool. But yeah, Verdigal Group, quick background on us. We're a sustainability, sort of deep green consulting company headquartered in Los Angeles. And we do everything from green certifications for buildings, like a LEED certification or WELL certification, Living Building Challenge, Net Zero, pretty much anything related to sustainability in the built environment are what we work on. And we also do some of the technical services that are required for these types of buildings as well, like commissioning, which is going through and testing all the systems within the building, your lighting, your any renewable energy like solar that you have, domestic hot water. We'll commission all those systems to make sure they're optimized and functioning as efficiently as possible. So kind of on the energy performance side of the project. We do energy modeling as well as another technical service that's required on LEED projects. So we'll create a model of the building to understand how, if you change the windows or the insulation, what that does to the energy performance of the project. It's a little bit about us. I started the company about 7 years ago, and again, we're delighted to be here. I'm going to hand the mic over to Rebecca now.
Sure. Great. Thanks so much for having us here tonight. Super excited to be part of this project and let you guys know a little bit more about our ideas of how to bring sustainability. Thank you all for being here, and I know you're all sustainably focused. I think you just had your 100th meeting or so been going for a while. Congrats. So yeah, I'm excited to bring my background knowledge of studying at Loyola Marymount. I studied civil engineering and natural science and been in the construction industry for 7 years and always just had a passion for sustainability. So really excited to be here and talk about this project tonight.
So that's our team. Now we're going to get into the site, get into our vision, values program, and then we're going to dive pretty deep into sustainability and what the opportunities are. So here's the site. What you see outlined kind of in the less opaque color, that is what is the city's Village South specific plan. So that's south of the tracks going to Arrow Highway, along Bucknell, and then a little bit of frontage on both sides of Indian Hill. What you see outlined in blue is the South Village Development Project. So that is specifically what we are talking about tonight. As Hugh mentioned earlier, I want to clarify that we are separate from the city's effort. The city is working on the Village South specific plan, which will set the rules and the guidelines for this development. So the city's specific plan comes before this development. A couple things I want to point out about this site. We have a historic building, the Vortox building. We are planning to adaptively reuse that building, which I'll explain a little bit more in detail later. We also have really incredible proximity to public transit, the current Metrolink, and hopefully the Gold Line will come to Claremont. We also have proximity to the village. The village is very walkable from this place, and so there's access to jobs, services, shops. It's an incredible opportunity for walkability and for connection. This is also infill development. What that means is that it is within the urban center. And I want to clarify for the purposes of this discussion, when I say urban, that means built by humans. So whether it's a village or Hong Kong, that is all urban. A mountain is not urban. I just want to clarify that just so that there's not any confusion. So this site is urban infill. That means it's surrounded by existing development, and that's really important. We need to focus on urban infill to avoid the loss of natural lands and open space. Also, if everyone could hopefully silence their cell phones, that'd be much appreciated. Sorry we didn't mention that at the beginning. A couple other things about this site. This is a brownfield, which means it was previously developed. For sustainability reasons, it's very important to focus development on brownfield rather than greenfield land, and to retain open space for conservation and to avoid developing natural lands. This is also characterized by a lot of surface parking, which is a very inefficient land use. It's not really serving the community. If anything, it's exacerbating the urban heat island effect. And there's also no housing within the site. So now we're going to speak to our vision. Our big vision is we want to create a sustainable, inclusive, mixed-use neighborhood that actively fights climate change. And we believe that with the collaboration of the community and Sustainable Claremont and the city, that we can do this together. We want to create a culture of activity and mobility choice. So what that means is we want to create a place that is oriented towards pedestrians and bicyclists and taking public transportation, a place that makes it easy for people to get around no matter what their mode of transportation is, and a place that makes it enjoyable to choose to walk, to bike, and to do these active modes of transportation. We want to design for health. That's a value that we're going to be speaking to specifically. But there are policies and urban design methods that we can use to make this a neighborhood that functions as preventative health care. There are choices that you can make when you are building a neighborhood that influence everything from obesity levels to childhood asthma. And we want to understand what that research says and how can we make this a neighborhood that's healthy for all people that choose to be here. We want this to be a gathering place for community. We want to build on the incredible success of Lemley's Plaza and create a similar space for the public in Claremont. And I'll be speaking to new urbanism and the emphasis on the public realm a little bit more further later, but this is a huge emphasis of this project. And we're planning to have a large pedestrian public plaza, which we hope will serve as a multifunctional community gathering space. We also want this to be a platform for local entrepreneurship and culture. One of the things that makes Claremont so special is the locally owned businesses and how people here really value those locally owned businesses and shop local. So we want to make sure that this project honors that spirit and that we provide this as a platform for local entrepreneurs, for folks in Claremont and the village that want to expand their businesses. We hope that they choose to come here first. And we would much prefer to have a tightly edited and curated retail vision rather than having a lot of big box stores. We feel like that is not true to the Claremont spirit, and we don't want to have a lot of chains which are not in accordance with the values of Claremont. We want to be true to the spirit of Claremont. And then diverse housing options. Right now, Claremont has a missing middle in housing. There's a lot of single-family homes, there's income-restricted apartments, there's age-restricted apartments, there's some townhomes, but there's not much in the middle. And there's a lot of folks that are part of the Claremont community that work here, that participate in this community, that don't have a place to live. How many people work in the village, own businesses in the village, work at the colleges, but are priced out of Claremont and don't have a place to live? We want to provide housing for those folks in a place that is walkable, that is close to the village, and in a place where they can live low-carbon lives by design. So all in all, what we're advocating for is a neighborhood that returns to the village-style model of development that was prevalent to before World War II, in a place that is a complete urban village where people rely on biking, walking, public transportation, rather than simply automobiles all the time. So I'm briefly going to speak to our project values. These are our 5 core values that inform all of our design, programming decisions with the project. We developed these after long conversations with the community, as well as conversations between our development and design and consultant team, and we came together and found that these were the 5 core values that really were emergent throughout all of these conversations. So first, I'm going to speak to authenticity. That means we want to create a place that is true to the spirit and the personality of Claremont. We want this to be locally informed. As I said, we want to have tightly curated, locally owned retail. We want to focus on local supply, local sourcing, and we especially want to focus on local restaurants. We want to showcase the things that make Claremont so special. The public art, the heritage street trees, the walkable nature of the village, the locally owned businesses, the gourmet food, the historic preservation, the neighborliness. Those are the things that make Claremont such an incredible and special place, and we want to really showcase and celebrate that and bring that south of the tracks. Connectivity, that's another key value. When we speak about connectivity, it means physical connectivity and social connectivity. So physical connectivity means we want to make it easy for people to connect to their community, no matter how they're getting around. Whether you're walking, whether you're in a chair, whether you're biking, whether you're using a shared bike through the regional bike share program, whether you're taking public transit, or whether you're carpooling. We want to make it easy for everyone to access their community and emphasizing small connections and making sure we're not having really large blocks that make it challenging for pedestrians. When we speak about when we speak about social connectivity, that means that we're trying to create a neighborhood that makes it easy for folks to run into each other. We want to facilitate intergenerational connectivity. That means we want folks of all ages interacting and engaging in community building and hanging out and chatting with each other, because that's how you create a really diverse and welcoming community. And we think that that's really true to the spirit of Claremont. Inclusivity is another core value. This means we want to create a project that is inclusive to all folks, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, income, or level of ability. That's our baseline, and we understand that in order to create an inclusive space, you need to have an inclusive planning and development process. So we are going out of our way to bring as many folks into the conversation as possible. Anyone that wants a voice at a table, we would love to hear from them. And we have had a lot of success so far in getting a lot of diverse voices into the conversation, and we've been really encouraged by the level of engagement, and we hope to continue this further. Health is another key value here. As I mentioned earlier, we want to create a neighborhood which functions as preventative health care. That means creating a neighborhood which facilitates community and environmental health. And there are very specific design and programming choices that we can implement that are backed by decades of studies which show that the built environment where we live has a huge impact on our health. So let's build someplace that makes people healthier by design. And then our last and most relevant to this evening's conversation value is sustainability. Our approach to sustainability is based in collaboration and takes an interdisciplinary approach. We want to make sure we're adhering to the 3 pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. Environmental sustainability meaning that we want to mitigate environmental degradation, we want to be adaptive to climate change, and we want to promote environmental health. Our number 1 priority with all of this, the main goal that we all need to work towards, is eliminating fossil fuel use. That is the underlying goal in all of this that we are slowly working towards, and that we want to figure out how can we incorporate this into every level of the project. And that means reducing neighborhood-wide carbon emissions and figuring out how can we take really progressive approaches to doing so. Economic sustainability means we want to develop an economically productive and resilient neighborhood. We want to create a place which is economically productive and complementary to the village. We want to make sure that we are providing economic support for the village and increasing their consumer base and never taking away business from them. And then social sustainability. That means this has to be sustainability for everyone, regardless of your age, regardless of your income. We want everyone in Claremont to be able to participate in sustainability, not just those that can afford it. And so our approach is based on specific sustainable community policies and programs that have decades of evidence. And our kind of underlying belief with this is that neighborhoods have the power to influence their climate destiny. And we're challenging the notion that climate change is too big to fix, or it's going to be fixed by some external factor, that it's out of our hands. Change comes from within, and we think that Claremont is a community that can take charge of their climate destiny and can really set an example for the region and for other cities. And so I'm going to speak a little bit to, through this conversation, we're going to talk about how we can build a neighborhood that addresses 3 of the most pressing climate threats to Claremont: extreme heat, air pollution, and open space conservation, which is very much related to wildfire risk. So I'm briefly going to speak on our proposed program. I promise we're almost through the project-specific details, and we're going to be getting into sustainability very soon. But I just want to cover what our proposed program is. What are we saying that we'd like to have here? And this is based off of what we've seen of the draft-specific plan, our conversations with the community, and what our design and development team is proposing. We're proposing to have highly amenitized housing options, both rental and ownership, 15% inclusionary of both. We're planning to have the adaptive reuse and historic preservation of the Vortox building into a market hall. We're planning to have the Vortox Public Plaza. Like I said, this is taking lessons from Lemley's and other fantastic public spaces around the world, focusing on this multifunctional gathering space for community. We're going to have pedestrian paseos, which are dedicated pedestrian spaces that make it not only easy and convenient for people to walk around, but it makes it a really enjoyable and lovely experience so that people would choose to walk rather than any other mode of transportation. We're planning to have public art, a very large amount of public art. I'm personally advocating for interactive public art. That was an idea that we got from a Pitzer College Sustainable Studio class. Some of the students suggested that, and I thought that was a really fantastic idea, and it's a way to create public art which is really multifunctional, and it's inclusive, and folks of different ages can really enjoy it. We're also planning to have gardens, courtyard and otherwise. We have a couple really exciting ideas. The Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden has indicated interest in doing a satellite garden, which means they would have a dedicated space to have a garden that they would plant with native and drought-tolerant species, and it would be positioned to be an educational space with a lot of educational markers so that folks could come here and learn about the plants. We've also talked about having a sensory garden, which means a garden that is planted to stimulate all 5 senses so that it's an enjoyable experience for folks of all levels of ability. We've also talked about having a hummingbird or a butterfly garden, which is a place that's planted with plants to attract these certain species and to create this lovely experience where you're really integrated with nature. And there's specific choices that we can do like this that really bring the natural experience into the city and into the built environment. And that's part of sustainability, is connecting folks with nature. And we want to make sure that we're doing that in our program. We're also, as we mentioned earlier, planning to have locally owned businesses and restaurants. That's a huge part of this. We really want to make sure that our retail is focused on local ownership. And we want to keep this tightly edited so that we can keep our standards really high and stay true to the spirit of Claremont. We're also planning to have a boutique hotel, a rooftop restaurant with views of the beautiful mountains. That's something we don't have in Claremont yet. Planning to have structured parking, which means it would be similar to the parking structure that we have in the West Village, where you go, you park once, you get out of your car, and then you walk around and you participate in the vibrant pedestrian life. But if you do have to access this neighborhood by a vehicle, there will be parking for you. It's just not going to be on the street. It's going to be in a structure. And then last, we're planning to have creative office. And so next, we're going to speak a little bit to, well, not a little bit. We're going to be speaking very much in detail about sustainability. What we're proposing here is we can protect the future by learning from the past. And in order to adapt to climate change, we need to take some lessons from the past, and we need to build cities like we used to, moving towards a climate-responsive urban design that is centered around people. And I can't emphasize that enough, centering around people. We need to focus on the pedestrian and designing for humans. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we arrived at this conversation tonight and what our process has been to date. We have reviewed the Sustainable City Plan, looked at the general plan, looked at the Village South specific plan goals and principles. We've also engaged with the Sustainable Claremont Board in the past couple months. We shared with them very early on our approach to sustainability, what we were thinking. We got feedback from them about what they thought about the different rating systems, and they made it very clear that they're focused on renewables, and they gave us some suggestions about different sustainability consultants to get in touch with. This was actually when we were in the process of interviewing sustainability consultants, so when Verdigal's name came up, we knew that that was kind of a mark of success. We knew that they would be a great fit for Claremont. We've also had an open dialogue with the Harvey Mudd College researchers that are collaborating with Sustainable Claremont and working on the viability of net zero energy at this neighborhood level scale. We've had multiple meetings and calls, and they were kind enough to share their research and resources with us and to maintain a really open dialogue throughout that whole process. We also got feedback and student concepts on sustainability from a Pitzer College Sustainability Studio, which is focused on sustainable communities, and their project was focused on the South Village. And so with all of this feedback and these ongoing conversations, we took this, we digested it, and we have been doing our homework and researching and learning and expanding our sustainability team. And so we have brought on Verdigal Group and Drew as our sustainability consultant, and we've started to flesh out our sustainability plan. We know what the specific rating system we're going to be pursuing is. That's LEED Neighborhood, and we're hoping that the community will support us in pursuing this plan and that they'll be a collaborator. So the Sustainable City Plan, this is so critical. Claremont is a really incredible place for having a sustainable city plan. This is a very rare thing, and we're very fortunate to have this framework to work within. What I have listed up here is not a comprehensive list of all the goals, but these are all of the goals which we will be addressing. And you can see there's a large number of them. Tonight, we're going to be focused on sustainable land use and smart growth, goal 4.5. And the implementation strategies for these goals, which are listed in the Sustainable City Plan, are apply LEED neighborhood development design principles to new developments, and to promote mixed use and transit-oriented neighborhoods where appropriate. And that's really what we're going to be digging into tonight, how this can be implemented. And so we're really starting our conversation about sustainability at the foundation. We're going to talk about how the neighborhood we build can impact climate change on both a regional and a neighborhood level. And I'm going to hand it off to Drew now to speak a little bit about global and local climate change threats.
Thank you, Kaitlin. Man, yeah, applause. That was amazing. I'm going to steal the pointer here, this little guy. Thank you. We feel incredibly lucky as a third-party sustainability consultant to be on a team that really gets it, that's really aggressively going after sustainability for this project, for the Claremont people that will get to enjoy this project. It's been an incredible experience, and you know, kudos to all you guys for being here too. It's so great to have an engaged community as well, the Sustainable Claremont Group, and it's important for projects to be responsive to the community, and that's what this is all about. So thanks to everybody for caring, and we're trying to make as sustainable a project as possible with our team, and it's great for everybody to be out here and voicing opinions and sharing. We can share information, have a dialogue. So the existential threat that we're sort of responding to here and setting the stage is climate change, and you can see some images here on the screen. You know, forest fires have been a very present issue for all of us locally here in Southern California and Northern California as well. We have a fire season now, and you know, growing up on the East Coast in Maine, we never experienced anything like that. But now it's a very real issue that we have a risk of forest fires and wildfires. You know, flooding as well is a threat as sea levels rise. We have, you know, horrible air quality issues in Los Angeles, and in Claremont as well. There's some air quality issues. And then urban heat island effect and rising temperatures on some days that are hitting, you know, 120 degrees. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit with some of these climate change issues that we're trying to build a project to help mitigate and kind of combat. And I would love you guys to chime in on anything as I go here. But we've pulled some headlines here. And just to read through a few of these are all, you know, recent headlines. You know, you've got Wall Street Journal talking about, oops, wrong button here. despite the wildfires and drought, California keeps building, and farmers and developers continue to expand into remote areas, draining the state's water supply and putting its people at risk. We've got LA Times talking in an editorial, California talks a good game on land use and climate change, but it's still a land of SUVs and sprawl. And that's one of our key points in tonight's discussion as well, is combating sprawl as a major issue and contributor to climate change, and how building densely really helps that. And we'll get into that more as we talk tonight. We've got the Atlantic. California is becoming unlivable. The state is plagued by two major issues: wildfires and a lack of affordable housing. Each problem exacerbates the other. And on and on. You got the New York Times, Bloomberg, Reuters. I don't need to read through all these, but we have major issues here that we're trying to respond to. This is we'll take a little bit of time to kind of really digest what we're looking at here in this graph, but it's emissions by sector in California. And actually, Dick and I were talking before tonight. Ed Mazria, who founded Architecture 2030, did a keynote talk at the Net Zero conference a little over a month ago, and had some really great graphs and data points indicating, the climate change, where we're at now and what's going to be happening in the near future. And you can see here in the state of California, this outside ring here, 28% is coming from passenger vehicles, single occupancy vehicles. So building a walkable community, some of the goals that Kaitlin laid out for us as she started tonight's presentation, is one of the biggest things you can do to make a positive fight back against climate change. You can see on this inner circle here as well, you see transportation as a sector is 41% of the total emissions in California. So again, transportation, reducing single occupancy vehicle trips is a huge factor. Kaitlin, do you have anything you'd like to add on to that?
Yeah, so I just want to point out, if you notice, residential buildings count for 7.2% and commercial buildings count for 5.5%. So in comparison to passenger vehicles, that's much lower. And that's because California has been a leader in terms of sustainability and renewables. Every kind of energy-saving device, innovation, invention, it has been researched, invented, and implemented in California. We have been not just a national leader, but a global leader in sustainability and the fight against climate change. And we have done a lot. We were able to reach our 2020 emission goals set by the California Air Resource Board 4 years early, which is an incredible success. But the problem is, going forward, we have much bigger challenges ahead. If we were to continue to reduce emissions at the current rate, which as of 2017 was 1.7%, we would reach our 2050 goals 100 years late, which is pretty terrifying to think about. And so we have already been doing all of this aggressive action in terms of renewables, LEED building, really focusing on energy efficiency, and we've kind of maxed out there. The hard work has been done. And now the thing that we have to address is transportation, and that's how we live. And fundamentally, in California, we have this sprawling land use, which makes it impossible for us to reach our sustainability goals and to reach our emission reduction goals without radically addressing the way that we use land and the way that we live.
Yeah, and it just makes me think, I was lucky enough in college to get to study abroad in Rome. Anybody ever been over to Rome or Spain or anywhere over there? They have these great old cities that were built before cars came around, and so they're super walkable. We've got the piazzas and this great walkability, and it's interesting. Now we're trying to get back to that and build like they used to a couple hundred years ago, before the car came around. So again, I think you were going to speak to this one, I believe, weren't you, Kaitlin? Yeah.
So as you saw from all of those headlines connecting the failure of California to live sustainability and our current climate issues, housing policy is climate policy. And that's kind of the baseline which we need to understand. And we need to understand that sprawl is the root of rising carbon emissions. Sprawl can happen anywhere at any density. The main thing to understand about sprawl is that it isolates people. It means that it is impossible for you to connect with your community, to get to work, to get to school, to get to businesses, to restaurants, to places you want to go without having to depend on your car. Sprawl it's the outward expansion of low-density residential and commercial uses. It means that you're dispersing far away from the downtown core towards the urban periphery, gobbling up untouched greenfield and land. It means that there's rigid separation between homes, shops, workplaces. It means you have a massive network of roads, which are marked by really large block sizes. They're not walkable, and there's really limited access. There's much higher household energy usage as well as emissions per capita. There's a lack of transportation choices other than cars, and this difficulty walking. The definition of sprawl from the Sierra Club is scathing. Suburban sprawl, defined as irresponsible, often poorly planned development that destroys green space, increases traffic and air pollution, crowds schools, and drives up taxes. But this has been our operating system for growth for decades now. California was pretty much the birthplace of modern sprawl. Following the Second World War, we had massive population growth as well as the introduction of highways. All of a sudden, everyone had a personal automobile, and it felt like we had unlimited land and that we had this destiny to continue expanding, and that's what we did, and we never stopped. And now we have a region which is plagued by a housing crisis as well as a rising climate crisis. We have a place where their air quality is so problematic that the rates of childhood asthma are rising. Sprawl has been globally condemned by the UN. It's been condemned by just about every organization. In 2017, the UN adopted the UN Habitat New Urban Agenda, which was the global condemnation of sprawl and advocating for transit-oriented development, mixed use, and compact city centers. I'd like to speak a little bit about California and sprawl and our housing crisis. Many of you know we have a really extreme housing crisis at the moment. Right now, our shortfall of housing supply is 3.5 million units. That's a massive amount, and that has grown over decades and decades of not enough supply and rising population. Our population continues to grow, our economy continues to grow, but our housing supply does not grow with it. And as we continue to have this supply and shortfall, we will continue to have affordability issues. People will continue to be pushed to the fringe. People will live in far-flung places where they have 2.5-hour commutes each way every day. And it means that an entire generation is priced out of places like Claremont. And a lot of this is codified through zoning codes and single-family zoning, which as of the past month or so is no longer legal in California. The state has passed some laws regarding ADUs. But it's important to understand that we're not going to be able to address our housing crisis through small incremental actions just by adding an additional dwelling unit to everyone's backyards. We need to include that as well as addressing housing crisis by increasing supply at all levels. We need to increase a diverse housing supply, and we need to put it in places that are location efficient, in places that are already developed. We need to make sure that we are not developing any more open space and that we are avoiding greenfield development. And sprawl has significant costs. When we only allow a certain type of house, a certain type of development and home, so when you have a community that only allows single-family homes, it means that certain people are not allowed to live there. It means that you're keeping people out, and it means that they have to go further and further and further to seek housing. It fuels the homelessness crisis, and it prices out pretty much the entire millennial generation. And this type of zoning and this type of land use is incredibly detrimental for the environment as well. Single-family homes are more energy intensive, and they also have a significantly higher carbon footprint than any other housing type, including multifamily. Later in the presentation, we'll be getting specifically into that data. Single-family zoning also renders communities absolutely dependent upon cars, which is the most environmentally detrimental form of transportation. It pushes development further into the wildland urban interface. And so that is where places are most at risk for wildfire. And that's really where we should not be building. We need to be containing our urban footprint. And 60% of new housing in the United States since 1990 has been built in that area, which is a pretty staggering statistic to think about. And it means that we're increasing fire risk because we are putting people in the path of the fires, as well as increasing and exacerbating the climate change, which creates even more of these fires. So next we're going to be talking about a snapshot of housing and transportation in Claremont as it is today.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. We did an event. Kaitlin was mentioning the housing shortage, incredible housing shortage, especially with affordable housing. And the number for LA County is 58, almost 59,000 homeless people for the count this year that just happened a couple months ago in LA County right now, which is, it's a small city of people. I grew up in a town of 6,000 people, which is really a sad figure. And then also, just a quick comment on this image here, but this is just crazy, isn't it? This is not an environment for people. You know, we built this, but it's a habitat for cars, and you know, avoiding sprawl and is what we're trying to get away from building structures like this. That could all be trees. That's what we're going for. I think, were you going to do this one too? Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
So this is a snapshot of the status quo of housing and transportation in Claremont. This data is, it's from the 2017 American Community Survey. That's the data input. And the tool that I got this from is the Center for Neighborhood Technology. They have a really fantastic housing and affordability index. The intention of this organization is to put neighborhood level data into the hands of citizens and advocates so that people can learn more about the specifics of housing and transportation and the cost burden in different communities. So on the left, you can see the average housing and transportation costs as a percentage of income. Generally, over 30% is what's considered rent burden. So the average person in Claremont is 13% above the average, the criteria for rent burden. And that's not even counting transportation. Because folks have no other option rather than to own a personal automobile, you have to have a car, and cars are the most expensive form of transportation. Looking at transportation costs, people in Claremont are spending on average 15 grand per year, and they're driving 21,000 miles per year. That's way too much. That means people in Claremont are on average driving 60 miles a day, which is insane. And people own about 1.93 autos per household. What we're talking about is how can we make this easier for folks to live in places where they don't have to have cars, where you can if you choose to, but where there's options, where there's choices. And one of the key issues is that the entire generation of millennials is priced out of Claremont. A 30-year-old millennial with a median income, according to Los Angeles County, it would take them 40 years to save up for a 20% down payment on an average priced home in Claremont. That's pretty staggering. That's not accessible. For the entire millennial generation, single-family home ownership is essentially a luxury good, and this whole generation is priced out. And if Claremont wants to be an economically productive and sustainable place, we need to be inclusive to folks of all ages. And I'm going to hand it over to Drew next to speak about we're going to be talking about neighborhood level climate data. We're going to be talking about emissions per household, heat. We're going to be speaking about air pollution, and we're going to be speaking about the wildland-urban interface and wildfire risk. Take it away.
Great, thank you, Kaitlin. Yeah, we have just a couple great graphics to share with you guys. So this first one here is Claremont greenhouse gas emissions per household. And it's a color coordinated map that we're looking at here. You can see close to where we're sitting today, right here by the name Claremont. And you can see the color here is annual greenhouse gas emissions per household. So we're in the 3.3 to 5.1 ton area, which is actually lower than the northern parts of the map of Claremont here. Have a much higher greenhouse gas per household footprint, and so there's more density, closer to the freeway here and the train tracks, and as you get further north, there's more single-family homes, large homes, which have a higher you have more space that you're heating and cooling. You have a higher footprint. You have more emissions from vehicle trips as well. So it's just important to note that density is a good thing as far as greenhouse gas emissions go.
As well as walkability. I'd like to point out that the neighborhoods that you see that have the lightest color, which corresponds to the lower rate of emissions, those are the neighborhoods that are walkable and that are around the village. If you guys are familiar with the metric walk score, that sort of, it's aggregate measure which indexes neighborhood walkability. And so the highest level of walkability is 100. If you have no walkability, it's 0. Around the village, there's a walk score of 86. And so those are the households that are in this bracket of 3 to 5 tons or 5 to 6 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per household. But only 11% of Claremont's population live in those places. Whereas neighborhoods like North Claremont have a walk score of 6. And that's 56% of Claremont's population is living in those neighborhoods and is in this highest bracket of emitting 8.6 or greater tons annually. And so this is to say location is the most important factor that determines the sustainability and the environmental impact of real estate. Location matters, and we're going to be speaking more to that throughout this presentation. I'll hand it back to Drew.
Yeah, you know, going back to those piazzas in Rome where you can sit and have your espresso, and it's so enjoyable. And you have it here with the Lemley Plaza close by here. It's so great because you can walk to all the basic services that you need. You've got your grocery store, the school, you know, your place of worship, your pharmacy, your restaurants. Everything is within walking distance. So again, that's what we're trying to get back to with this project. Next graphic here, we've got climate change in Claremont. We've got a heat graphic here. And this is a little bit tricky the way the coloring works. It's urban heat island index here. And so at the top, the green is the lower numbers, and red is sort of actually in the middle. And then as it gets to lighter shades of red and pink and white, it's the highest numbers. So where we are here in Claremont, we're a little bit actually higher heat level than Pomona because it's a little bit darker shade of red.
I just want to pop in and mention that. So this is an index. What they're measuring here is not overall heat. What they're measuring is instances of extreme heat. And so that means days that are above the historical average of heat and where it is extreme and dangerous heat. And what we want to point out here is that the whole Los Angeles region is at risk for extreme heat through climate change, and places like Claremont are especially at risk. You can see that this whole Inland Valley region is in a very high bracket of this urban heat island index. And this is a tool from the Cal EPA, which is available online if you would like to dig into this a little bit further on your own.
Yeah, and these high heat days can be very dangerous, especially for the elderly and the very young children, especially if you don't have air conditioning on these hot days, and if the utilities are shutting off power as they're starting to do now to prevent wildfire risk. This is an important risk to look at, are these high heat days. And you can see the lighter green down in this area is more natural habitat, and that's where you have more trees, more green space, and you have a lower heat issue.
And so this is a really pressing neighborhood level climate threat. And sorry, could we go back, Drew?
Oh, no worries. There we go. Okay,
And
I lost
so
it for a second.
researchers have started looking into how can we design a neighborhood that would cool itself down. And there has been a fair amount of study going into this. And there's a specific study that looked into what are nature-based designs that can be implemented in order to create a neighborhood that combats urban heat and cools itself down by design. And so researchers out of Portland State University had a really massive undertaking with citizen volunteers that were measuring urban heat instances and looking into these nature-based designs. And what they found were 6 really critical choices that we can make that allow neighborhoods to be cooler by design. 3 are natural: ground level vegetation, the volume of the tree canopy, and the height of the tree canopy. As we have moved away from the traditional village-style model of development and towards this really auto-oriented, sprawling kind of development, we have lost a lot of our street trees and a lot of the urban forest. We need to focus on reforestation in making sure that we have adequate vegetation to provide a cooling effect. So those are 3 of the plant and natural-based nature designs. The other 3 were related to the human environment and the built environment. And those are the height of buildings. They found that buildings that were too short, low-density buildings like big suburban box stores, created much hotter afternoons. It's important to have tall enough buildings to cast afternoon shade. They also found that the difference in building height is critical. It provides air circulation, which provides then a cooling effect, and then coloration of the buildings. We need to be mindful and intentional about the coloration of buildings in order to make sure that they can create a cooler environment. And so what we're hoping is that we can draw upon this research and use these evidence-backed policies to create a neighborhood which addresses urban heat and which cools itself down.
Yeah, you can have temperatures that are 10, 20 degrees lower by reducing the amount of asphalt everywhere and using lighter color shades of building materials. We've got the next graphic here on air quality, and this is interesting. It's showing a white or light color here, like you see up in sort of the San Gabriel Mountains here, is particulate matter in the 2.5 percentile here. That's very low, and so that's good air quality. As you get darker shades, you get worse and worse air quality. And so where we are here in Claremont appears to be this color here, the 70 to 80 range for the particulate matter, which is, it's quite bad. It's an issue. And I actually live in Sierra Madre, just down the way here in the same zone. But something to be aware of as we sort of set the stage for issues that we're trying to combat.
And I'd also just like to point out that the air quality in Claremont is not equal throughout different neighborhoods. I don't know if you guys can see this, but the South Claremont neighborhood is in a higher percentile, which means that the air quality in South Claremont is more polluted. That's due to proximity to the freeway and too much traffic. We want to create a neighborhood which improves air quality for the entire neighborhood surrounding us. And that's an ambitious goal, but we can do it. And we can do it if we enable people to have mobility choice, active transportation, and fewer cars on the road.
Yeah, like we looked at the previous graphic tonight, the emissions from vehicles are a huge contributor to air quality locally here in Claremont. The next slide we have here is showing wildfire risk locally. And again, I was stunned myself to see this, as I live in a very similar band right, half an hour away in Sierra Madre. But the wildfire risk coming off the hillside here in the mountain, there's even an area that extends down in towards the college here, as you can see. That's a very high fire risk area. And
the bottom line is these are places that we should not be building. We have already extended our development much too far into this wildland urban interface, into this fire hazard severity zone. We need to make sure that no future development is going in places like this. In Claremont, according to the new state rules and the new numbers released by SCAG, is going to have to plan for about 1,600 new homes in the next 8 or 10 years. And so we need to think really intentionally about where are those homes going to be built, and how do we make sure that they're not going into open space and that they're not going into this wildfire hazard zone. Yeah,
we don't want to put people in these high-risk areas, essentially.
So I'm going to speak a little bit to smart growth. Smart growth is, it's been around for several decades. It's an urban planning and transportation theory that focuses on concentrating growth in compact, walkable urban centers to avoid sprawl. It's kind of a more regional level approach to urban planning. It encourages a mix of building types and uses, diverse housing and transportation options, development within existing neighborhoods, and community engagement. If a building or a larger development uses green construction techniques, but it is in a poor location that destroys natural areas and requires people to drive long distances or exposes people to toxic substances, that will likely overshadow all of the benefits of green construction. Where you build and the compactness of what you build is what matters most for sustainability. And that's one of the underlying assumptions of smart growth. Smart growth has incredible environmental impacts. It can actively fight and mitigate climate change. It can improve air quality, improve water quality, it can reduce brownfields, and it can conserve open space. There is a very wide interdisciplinary smart growth network of government organizations, NGOs, policymakers, and private groups. The EPA is one of the founding members of this network. A few of the other participants of the Smart Growth Network are the American Farmland Trust, the American Public Health Association, the American Society of Landscape Architects, the National Association of Realtors, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Project for Public Spaces, the Trust for Public Land, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Urban Land Institute. So across disciplines and across sectors, there is wide support for smart growth. Smart growth is specifically named as a goal in Claremont's Sustainable City Plan. It's goal 4.5. And so Claremont already has this understanding of smart growth, but we haven't really had the opportunity to implement it so far. And this development, the South Village, is the most optimal opportunity for implementing smart growth. And what I'm going to speak to next is new urbanism, which is a cousin to smart growth. New urbanism is kind of the neighborhood level application of smart growth. While smart growth focuses more on the government policy and the transportation infrastructure and the regional level, new urbanism is more focused on the finer grained details, the design, and the neighborhood level. Thank you. So we're going to speak a little bit to new urbanism. What it is a Congress for New Urbanism. It was created several decades ago as an urban design movement promoting walkable, mixed-use, sustainable neighborhood development. The Congress for New Urbanism provides the guidelines for the best practices in this kind of development. I'd like to point out that two of our lead architects on this project are actually founders and authors of the Charter for New Urbanism. They were instrumental in founding this design movement, Stefanos Palazoidis and Elizabeth Moule. And smart growth and new urbanism were kind of co-creators to the Complete Streets movement, which is currently hopefully being implemented in Claremont and which is being discussed at the national level. Next one. Thank you. And so we're going to talk about density, compact, walkable development. Density is a thing that gets talked about a lot, but we need to discuss what does it actually mean and what does it not mean. So what this image is showing here is the exact same density with different architectural forms. So I think we can all agree that there's one that's much more preferable, and there's others which are not quite so palatable. And so density, compact development, those are two of the most important things to smart growth and new urbanism. And that requires walkability and it requires density. And when we're saying density and compact development, it does not mean uniformly high-rise buildings, and it doesn't even mean uniformly high density. It means an average, a blended density. Compact development is about the interconnection of streets, the design of structures and spaces at the human scale. And human scale does not mean make buildings short and close to human size. It means make them oriented towards people. And so I'm going to do a brief discussion about what is the evidence about the outcomes from density. What can density do? The big idea is that increased density means more opportunities for walkable neighborhoods and car-free transit, which cuts pollution. It means shorter commutes, less driving, which means less congestion, fewer road fatalities, and improved health outcomes from cleaner air. And so even though there are a lot of benefits to sensitive density, density in the United States peaked in 1950, and it's been declining ever since. And that's really due to the widespread adoption of sprawl. And so density can do a lot of things in neighborhoods. It can make them physically healthier, it can make them more economically productive, it can make them more diverse. I was recently reading a study that was looking at the impact of density on innovation. They found that looking at patent innovations and population density, a 10% increase in street density and connectivity is associated with a 1% increase in innovation and patents. That's pretty incredible. And that's the sort of thing that we would like to implement at the South Village and to create a neighborhood which is focused on producing innovation. Density and compact development also creates much less expensive infrastructure than sprawl. On average, it's 47% less expensive than conventional development patterns. It also improves home values. Walkability, density, and compact development has an incredible impact on the neighborhoods surrounding it. A 10-point increase in walk score will increase commercial property values by 5 to 8%. That's pretty incredible. And it can also do great things for health. Density alone has been measured as a factor which can be associated with reductions in body fat. There was a massive study from the British medical journal, The Lancet, in 2017, and they found that density was correlated with lower BMI. And so let's talk about how density actually impacts sustainability and climate change. A really prominent urbanist, Peter Calthorpe, in his recent book about sustainable urbanism, he calculated that through urban densification alone, the United States could achieve half of the carbon reductions that we need to hold global temperature rise to just 2 degrees Celsius. Doubling population weighted density, so going from 10 dwelling units per acre to 20 dwelling units per acre, for example, that's associated with a 48% reduction in carbon emissions from household travel and a 35% reduction in emissions from residential energy usage. And that's just from density alone. Imagine what kind of impact we could have if we combined that with green buildings and with electric vehicles. Do you mind going to the next one? So now, perfect, okay, fantastic. So we're gonna be speaking a little bit to energy usage and emissions as it relates to housing type and location. So first, we're looking at the status quo. This is a single-family detached home in a conventional suburban development. So what you see on the y-axis is measuring energy usage, so million BTUs per year. And the lighter gray is looking at home energy use without green buildings. And that's compared to the lighter green, and that's home energy usage with green buildings. The top bar of the graph is looking at transportation energy usage, the top dark gray, and then the darker green is looking at with green automobiles. So we see that a single-family detached home has an average of 240 million BTUs per year if it's non-green, and then the greenest single-family home can achieve 158 million BTUs per year if it combines green automobiles and green buildings. What happens when we introduce location efficiency? What happens when, awesome. What happens when we compare it to transit-oriented development? And so this is a single-family home, which is not in a conventional suburban development. It's not sprawl, it's transit-oriented, so that means it's close to transit. And you can see that there's incredible reductions in overall energy usage just because of that reduction in transportation. And so next we're gonna look at single-family attached. So it's a little bit better. There's a lot of, there's some efficiencies when you have shared walls. It allows for increased energy efficiency, and there's some improvements. And as you can see, TOD is always preferable to conventional suburban development. Location is so critical to household energy usage. And so now let's talk about if you have multifamily. What we're proposing is the kind of development which is on the farthest right. We're proposing to do a green building, green automobile, multifamily TOD project. And this is low carbon, low energy, and efficient by design. And I'd just like for everyone to take a minute and to kind of digest this graph and to look at it. And this really shows that location is the most important factor in the environmental impact of real estate development. We can have the greatest energy efficiency and sustainability impact when we combine all of these approaches, and that's what we're advocating for.
Virginia, both coal mining areas, and so we see the opportunity to supplant the closed coal mine with a new solar panel assembly factory so that we can actually...
So it's between CSD and TOD.
And use another kind of extracted resource, which is capturing photons that are landing on the Earth every day that we're just kind of now learning how to mine.
I'm sorry. I was just pointing out, so there's 3 chunks to this. We've got single-family detached and single-family attached, and then multifamily. And we're looking at 2 bar graphs in each one for CSD and then transit-oriented development for each of these. So the project that we're talking about tonight is proposing this this best case scenario here with the green bars on the far right here for transit-oriented development.
And so I'm going to briefly speak to the specifics of transit-oriented development. What does it mean, and what does the evidence show that transit-oriented development can do? And then I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca to speak to Lead Neighborhood. So what is transit-oriented development? It means development that is not only close and proximate and walkable to transit, it means that it is specifically programmed and oriented to encourage people to use active transportation. It's about creating attractive, walkable, sustainable communities that allow folks to have housing and transportation choice and to live in convenient, affordable, pleasant places. So the words that you see up here, this is from the International Institute on Transit and Development. This is what they count as the criteria of a successful transit-oriented development. Walking. That means it has to be a neighborhood that promotes walking. It has to be a safe, complete, and accessible pedestrian realm. Cycle means you need to prioritize non-motorized transportation networks, making sure that it is easy, safe, and convenient for folks to bike around. Connect. That means you're creating dense networks of streets and paths. It means that there's not really long blocks. It means that there's a lot of easy connectivity. Transit, that's kind of self-explanatory, but it means you have to have that connection to public transportation and high-quality public transportation. You need to have a mix of uses. You want to plan for mixed use, mixed income, and mixed demographics. And that means incorporating both vertical and horizontal mixed use. Densify. You need to optimize density according to the needs of the population and the capacity of the space. Compact, that means efficient, compact development, which is easy and walkable for folks. And shift. That means increasing mobility by regulating parking and road use and applying creative parking management and transportation demand strategies. Transit-oriented development is so important because it provides increased access to jobs, opportunities, it increases housing choice and affordability, it increases mobility options, it creates community revitalization, it creates placemaking, and there are so many environmental benefits. And so in the next slide, I'm going to get into a brief overview of what are the benefits of transit-oriented development. So I'm going to speak to the specific numbers about the environmental benefits, but this is in the next slide, but this is just a brief overview. So TOD has incredible environmental, economic, and quality of life impacts. It reduces emissions. It reduces driving and the number of cars on the road. It also reduces household energy usage, as we covered in the last slide. In terms of economy, there's incredible infrastructure cost savings associated with TOD. There's increased retail sales, as well as reducing household transportation costs, which means that folks have income that's freed up to spend in the local economy and to support local businesses. And it also improves nearby home values. There have been some studies which have looked into specifically how does transit-oriented development impact the home values of the nearby houses and communities. And on average, a house that's in a TOD zip code is worth 4 times that of a house in a non-TOD zip code. So that's a pretty incredible impact. And quality of life. As I've said so many times, it increases choice for both housing and mobility. It improves public health, it reduces traffic congestion, and it makes a neighborhood much more walkable. And so next we're going to be talking about what are the specific environmental impacts that TOD can have. And this is from a really massive study from Transform, which is a government-funded partnership for housing. They were looking at a really wide sampling of California-specific TODs. This is what they found. A 50 to 60% reduction in household driving. That means that TOD reduces the number of cars on the road. A TOD, when implemented correctly, will reduce household automobile ownership by 0.63 and overall household driving by 50 to 60%. Household energy usage, the reductions can be between 55 to 70%. Multifamily TODs on average use 55% less energy than single-family homes, and that's regardless of green building techniques or electric vehicles. And as we've been emphasizing throughout this whole presentation, housing type and location has a major impact on energy consumption and costs. And finally, TOD can reduce greenhouse gas emissions for households by 40%. It is an incredible and durable strategy to address and mitigate climate change. And so we're going to talk about what makes a successful TOD. You can't just put a development next to transit and call it a TOD. And there have been studies which have tried to quantify this. And so they've looked into transit-adjacent development versus transit-oriented development. What makes transit-adjacent development? Low density, lots of surface parking, too much parking, single-family homes, and no pedestrian and cycle access. It is not oriented towards transit, and it is not actively trying to encourage folks to choose active transportation. Transit-oriented development, on the other hand, is compact, it's walkable, it has appropriate density, there is both horizontal and vertical mixed use, and there is smart parking management. And you can see what the impacts are. When you have transit-adjacent development versus transit-oriented development, vehicle ownership is double that in adjacent development. Only 16% of commuters in transit-adjacent development will choose active transportation, whereas 53% of commuters in transit-oriented development will choose active transportation. Transit-adjacent development has a much higher carbon footprint than transit-oriented, and households that are in transit-adjacent developments will spend a higher share of their income on housing and transportation costs. And this is why it's so important that we get transit-oriented development right. It's not enough to just say that it's transit-oriented. You need to make sure that you are implementing the appropriate and evidence-backed policies that make this a development that is oriented towards transit and allows this development to realize all of the economic, social, and most importantly, sustainability impacts that TOD can have. So next, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca to briefly speak on net zero, and then she's going to get into lead neighborhood.
Hi, all. Thanks for all the backup research. Thank you so much, Kaitlin and Drew. So what do we do with all of this research? We have the facts. We know the impacts that climate change is having on the community here at Claremont and globally. So how do we address this? One of the ways is net zero, and the definition of net zero is that your building will produce as much energy as the building is consuming. There's a few different definitions out there, but the basic California definition is shown by this scale graphic right here. So it's definitely a great target to go after. There have been about 500 buildings across the nation that have tried to achieve net zero. And not all of them have succeeded, but all of them have come very close, let's say maybe 90%. So it's definitely a great goal to go after and try to achieve, incorporating the three goals: economic, social, and environmental. One of the constraints, though, of net zero energy is that there's all these other opportunities for improvement: water conservation, reducing the heat island effect, and all the other opportunities that we've discussed today, benefits of reduced car dependence, and therefore will have improved air quality. So what is proposed for the South Village project has to do with LEED. It's the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. There's a handful of different rating systems out there. New construction, which is building design and construction, core and shell. There's also interior design and construction. But the best way to connect all of these dots, connect all of the buildings and transportation and the resources within the community, is LEED for neighborhood and design. LEED for neighborhood development. So this was brought up by the National Resource Defense Council in partnership with the U.S. Green Building Council, or USGBC for short, and with the Congress for New Urbanism. They created the LEED for ND, LEED for neighborhood development. And going back here, there's 4 different levels you can achieve. Certified, silver, gold, and platinum is the highest achieving level that you can achieve. Here's a brief overview of the LEED for neighborhood development scorecard. Total possible points are 110. So there's 3 main categories: smart location and linkage, neighborhood pattern and design, and green infrastructure and buildings. As you can see, the most amount of points to achieve is neighborhood pattern and design. So that first initial layout of how you design and lay out your neighborhood is key. There's also a couple other categories where you can achieve more points: innovation, design, and process, and regional priority. So as said by Cade Benfield, where you live matters most, more than energy consumption, than what you live in. So the first of 3 categories is the smart location and linkage, and I think the visual graphics speak a lot in itself. So smart locations near public transportation, housing local businesses, places that you can walk and bicycle easily. Design with nature, as Kaitlin mentioned before, designing with nature, varying heights of buildings, and having lots of airflow, and building with light colors so you reduce that heat island effect. Also incorporating a lot of trees and native plants into your design. Connected neighborhoods, this really brings about the enjoyment and quality of life if you can really connect with your neighborhoods and have that culture alive. And again, public transportation, having connection to the Metrolink, which is very close in proximity to the proposed project. All right, next, the second of third categories is neighborhood pattern and design. So what do we build? Neighborhoods that use land efficiently. Not building on greenfield sites, but areas that have already been developed and just improving on those sites that already have been built upon. Diverse and convenient neighborhoods, so connecting all ages, cultures within the city. Walkable streets. Walking is the easiest, cheapest way to reduce your carbon footprint. And it's very enjoyable to get out there, enjoy the fresh air, and connect with your neighbors. The last three, reduce parking, transportation, and demand, and bicycle-friendly design. Those, again, are public transportation and really connecting the city and using the best form of transportation to get around conveniently and efficiently. Mixed uses and community spaces has a real emphasis in building vertical, so making good use of land and having your pharmacy, your place that you like to shop, everywhere that you like to go run your errands within close proximity. The last category here is green infrastructure and buildings. So again, green buildings using the LEED system. There's also other certifications out there that you can achieve for your buildings. Reusing older buildings, so repurposing buildings, which is part of the South Village plan. Reducing pollution by walking. The walking score is 86, right, in the area? Yeah, and can further improve, which has an economic benefit with every 10 points that you improve of your walk score. Keeping things cool is the heat island effect, so incorporating a lot of trees in design and building with materials that reflect off that sunlight so you're not absorbing it and trapping the heat. Neighborhood-wide energy. It's not only buildings that are using the energy. You also have these maps and signs, street lights that can be powered by clean energy. Recycling and reuse. So not only when the building is and neighborhoods are being used operationally wise, you want to be it's important to recycle materials, but you can also build with recycled and reusing materials. And that further reduces your carbon footprint.
Thank you so much. So what Rebecca just presented was LEED Neighborhood. It is essentially where LEED meets smart growth and new urbanism, and it was co-created by those three entities, the U.S. Green Building Council, smart growth, and new urbanism. And what she presented was the different categories and what the different credits are related to. And so as you can see, some of those are in our court as the developer, but a lot of that will be up to the community and decided through the specific plan process. We hope that the community will be supportive of our vision of LEED Neighborhood and be a collaborator and that we can work towards this goal together. So what are some of our opportunities going forward? If you believe in this vision and if you want to advocate for sustainability and a neighborhood that fights climate change, you can participate in the Village South Specific Plan public process next year, and you can advocate for the plan to allow a LEED Neighborhood certified development. You can also support active transportation in Claremont. You can advocate for and support the Gold Line. You can participate in micromobility. Okay, I'll just read it to you guys. Anyways, micromobility is coming to Claremont. Right now, the city is studying joining a regional bike share program with the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, which would introduce between 1,000 and 2,000 bike shares to the whole region. And so it means that this would be connected to other cities. There's also the Complete Streets movement. And we are hoping that Indian Hill will be turned into a complete street. We know that the city has a plan for this, and we encourage the community to advocate for that. Complete streets are part of smart growth, they're part of LEED Neighborhood, and they save lives and they fight climate change. And finally, you can keep in touch with the South Village development as we further develop our sustainability plan, as we dig deeper into energy, dig deeper into water, waste, landscape, food, and education. And we hope that you will participate and join us in furthering this conversation. If you'd like to stay in touch, you can find us at our website. It's ClaremontSouthVillage.com. And now we'll open it up for discussion. I'm so sorry we took so long. We just had so much to cover. Thank you guys so much.
So we'll take some questions now, and we're going to ask that you speak into the microphone. So we'll pass that along.
Thanks. I have two questions about constraints. I have been told that a major constraint is what the property owners in the Village South development plan are willing to put up with. And I wonder how much freedom you feel you have there. The second issue is population and state requirements. I've heard there's some state requirements about how you develop open space and how tall the buildings are and that sort of thing. I guess the third question would be, what do you think the chances are of coming anywhere near approaching the critical level of really substantial greenhouse gas reduction in 10 years?
Okay, so that was 3 questions. The first one, the property owners are all supportive of this vision, bottom line. The second question was about open space requirements and height. We believe that our interdisciplinary design team, they have designed and developed collectively probably hundreds of sustainable communities, many of which are in California. We think that they are very capable of complying with code requirements and restrictions and ensuring that there's adequate open space. And then, sorry, what was the third question?
I've forgotten what it is myself.
Greenhouse gas emissions.
Oh, yes. What is potential of approaching substantial greenhouse gas reductions in 10 years is said that is going to be necessary in order to really address climate change?
For this development or for the state?
Well, it's for emissions in general.
I think it's incredibly possible if we use these evidence-backed policies and if we especially use smart growth and TOD. The most important way that we're going to address emissions is through reducing the number of cars on the road and the amount that we drive. If we're going to hit our emissions target by 2030, the average person in California has to drive 4 less miles per day. And to make that less of a burden on folks, let's make it easier for people to live in walkable places. That's kind of the big idea of this. And everyone kind of has to do their part in trying to drive less. Electric vehicles are part of the situation, as well as car share, as well as carpooling. And we need to have a comprehensive approach, allowing people to have more mobility choice. When you enable more options, it means that people aren't required to drive. And I think a lot of folks would choose to have a more sustainable option and choosing a transportation option which would make them healthier as well as their environment. And so I think if we all work together and support these policies that we can do it.
Thanks. Kaitlin and crew, this is exactly what we needed. I mean, a little just serious talk about transit-oriented design and development. I mean, I understand exactly what you're doing. Let me just focus on one of the most challenging aspects, I think, of this vision, and that is complete streets for Indian Hill, especially as you move across the tracks into that first block or so down to Arrow. Complete streets implies that there'll be pedestrian passageways there, and they're very important to actually make sure that people flow very easily and nicely from north of the tracks to south of the tracks. But then bikes, I mean, presumably bike lanes, and then maybe a lane of traffic going each way. I mean, can you visualize it at this point?
Yes. There's very specific design guidelines related to complete streets, which includes including adequate access for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for cars, a big emphasis on safe crossings. I think that because of all of the changes going on Foothill, that there's going to be a really relevant precedent for the community to draw upon. People can just go up there and they can see what it's like in action. And I think as we continue this conversation about complete streets in Indian Hill, it's so important to talk to the South Claremont community and to understand what are their priorities and their needs, and how do we make sure that they are getting adequate access and that they are part of this whole conversation, and that we are understanding their viewpoint and their needs as it relates to complete streets.
The description was sweet.
Can you use the microphone?
Excuse me. One thing you haven't covered, and I think is crucial to South Claremont, is the description of 7 buildings, 600 to 800 units, residential units, in 7 buildings. That was a description that we saw on the internet. And can you describe what those 7 buildings, how high they're going to be? I mean, we have, is that description still relevant? Where did you see that, Jim?
We can't comment on this at this point. The specific plan is still going through the process, and the specific plan is what's going to dictate.
That is on the vertical description of current projects they're working on in Village South.
They removed that. That was
So-
an estimate that we had shared early on. We don't mean to confuse anyone and cause any misinformation, so we'll remove that. And thank you for
Yeah,
thank you
particularly-
for bringing that to our attention.
Because our understanding is that there's only 1 parking for each unit being planned. I don't know if that's correct. And if that's not correct, then stop me. But last night at the council meeting, and we've heard this over and over and over again, I know where you're trying to go, and it's a good place to go, but it doesn't seem that we're quite ready yet. And last night at the council meeting, there was another individual who came up and said that he had, he was living in Claremont in a multifamily community, and that he had 1 parking space. His girlfriend kept the parking space, and he didn't have another parking space. Now, we have a restriction on parking in the neighborhoods in the evening, and he said he had to go to Pomona and leave his car in someplace in Pomona and then be driven in order to park, to have 2 cars. That's going to be a real problem. And I'm hoping people will look at that, because I don't think we're ready yet to have only 1 parking space. Also, the village already has a parking problem, a huge parking problem. And so I think there's a big fear in the village that it would intensify our parking problem to have only 1 parking space. But I do want to say that. And I understand where you're trying to go. I don't know that we can go there yet.
So what I'd like to say is we are not writing the specific plan. As we've clarified multiple times, that's being written by the city's consultants, and all of these choices are being decided by the public and by the council in the
Gotcha.
specific plan process.
Appreciate that.
So we will adhere to what is decided in the specific plan. We are advocating for reduced parking, which is an empirically backed policy, which is part of transit-oriented development. And as we discussed, transit-oriented development reduces household vehicle ownership. That means fewer cars on the road. We don't have a parking problem, we have a vehicle problem. We have too many cars. And when people don't have choices, they have to drive. And that doesn't mean that they're bad people that hate the environment. It means that that's the option to them, and that is how they're able to access their community.
I presume you've already done this kind of work in the past. You have a place that we could look at, that, and see how they did it, and it's really that lead stuff, and something similar like 17 acres and maybe 800 units. And then, if you've done it in the past, you pretty well know what it costs, other than the land. It might be more expensive here, who knows. So if you know all that, it comes down to just like buying anything else, is what can we afford to do, and they can work everything else. So if you spend $100 million to do this project, and you do 800 units, then the rents are going to probably be $2,000 or $2,500 a month. And then you have to say, well, how do you make this affordable? Is it going to fly? I mean, that should be in the front, right up front. What are you doing? What's the objective? How is it going to work if you can't afford? Nobody's going to afford it. With the parameters you give up, that it should be affordable. I have no problem with the lead stuff. It'd be wonderful, It would be wonderful if every one of those units were 100%. And it possibly could be, you know, with all the insulation, double pane windows, the solar panels, that's easy. And if you put parking structures off to the side that'll hold maybe 2,000 cars, because all this other stuff of bike lanes and all this, that'll take years and years to settle out. And the city of Claremont will probably have to put 1,000-unit parking places just to handle all the city employees and the colleges. So it's a big thing, but I think the citizens need to know where are we at on the cost. And if you've already done one of these, you should be able to figure this out like in a day, approximately, so that you could advise what a lead unit development would cost the city, so that they don't go their merry way and then at the end they end up doing what they think is right and they don't even do what you want or suggest. I mean, it sounds rational to go get the big picture right up front.
So part of the first part of the question I thought was very interesting, of examples of similar projects, and if you've got some of this.
What's challenging about lead neighborhood is that under a lot of current zoning codes, it's not actually legal. So it's been a very big challenge to implement lead neighborhood. There are examples of transit-oriented development. It's out, I think. Oh, no, I'm wrong. You were right. Thank you. So there are examples of new urbanist and transit-oriented developments. There are not a ton of those in Southern California, but I would point you to Del Mar Station, for example, in Pasadena. That was done by one of our architects, Will Polizoides. That's a good comparable. Del Mar Station. And I'll come up with a list of some other appropriate comparable TODs that are hopefully within about an hour or so. It's just challenging because in this area, we haven't really done this kind of development. It's somewhat untread territory, even though it's been done all over the nation and even all over the world. So the first project that I'm working on through completion is currently an entitlement, but as I've said, I am just one member of our development team. We have a number of other developers and designers on the team who have collectively developed and designed dozens of sustainable communities. Not all of them are here tonight, but they will be sharing more in the future. And I do have a relative idea to the cost, and we do believe that this kind of project is feasible and that it can be a financially productive place that serves the community and that's economically productive for generations to come. Thanks.
Okay. We have another question back here in the interest of giving everybody an opportunity.
Hi, I'm wondering what your approach would be with when Senator Wiener comes back with another SB 50. Would the developer, would village partners be willing to just work with the city and the local rules, or will, if SB 50 or like SB 50 comes back, will you just go with whatever the state allows you to go with?
While it's important to comply with state law, we think it's really critical to understand what the priorities and values of the community is, as well as the city. And so our approach would be really focused on collaborating and partnering with the city and with the community here. We don't want to create something that folks here don't want. We want to create something that is informed by the community and that's acceptable here.
We take one more question. You.
I think it's really great that you've defined net zero very broadly and that you're shooting for all of those achievements. The one thing I didn't hear you mention, and maybe it's implied by some other things you said, was what's called passive solar, which uses sun to warm in the winter but keeps it from warming in the summer, and other aspects of passive solar. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so we're definitely planning to incorporate elements of passive solar and solar. As I mentioned, this conversation was about land use and transportation. We're planning on digging into energy, waste, water, landscape, food, and education, but those are all going to be separate meetings, and we're going to be delving into those as we develop the plan and as we have more of a direction from the specific plan. But that's why we brought Verdigal on board. They're experts in ensuring that we are as efficient as possible and that we are maximizing our solar potential from the very outset. And normally developers don't bring on sustainability consultants so early in the development, and the planning process, but we wanted to make sure that we had their expertise to inform us and to provide kind of a gut check and some feasibility as we develop our plans based off of what the specific plan gives us, so that we can make sure that we are optimizing our solar capacity.
I just wanted to thank you. Wow, this is really loud. We have our community is so hungry for information, and I just appreciate how well you have presented all of this information and in such a comprehensive way. I feel like a lot of my questions have been addressed, and so thank you.
You're very welcome, and thanks for being here tonight.